William sat alone in the quiet sitting room at Kensington Palace, staring at the official envelope in his hands. The royal seal caught the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows. His fingers traced the edges of the thick paper, knowing that whatever was inside would be important. The envelope had been delivered by a private courier just an hour ago, marked with the words personal and confidential in elegant script. Kate was in the nursery upstairs, reading bedtime stories to Charlotte and Louis. Their laughter could be heard echoing through the palace corridors, a sound that normally brought William comfort. Today, however, he felt an unusual heaviness in his chest. Something about the formal delivery and the serious expression on the courier's face had unsettled him. He finally opened the envelope with careful precision. Inside was a letter written on official palace stationery, bearing the signature of Sir Edward Young, the Queen's private secretary. William's eyes scanned the words quickly at first, then slowed as the meaning became clear. His grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, had been experiencing serious health complications that had been kept secret from the public and most of the royal family. The letter explained that the Queen had been working with her doctors for several months, managing a condition that was progressively worsening. She had specifically requested that only the immediate heirs be informed at this stage. The document went on to detail upcoming medical procedures and the possibility that more significant changes might be necessary in the coming weeks. William's hands began to shake slightly as he read the final paragraph. The Queen wanted to meet with him and Charles privately within the next few days to discuss potential arrangements and preparations that might need to be made. The letter concluded with a request for absolute discretion and a reminder of the duty that comes with such sensitive information. Setting the letter down on the mahogany side table, William leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. Oh, the weight of royal responsibility had always been present in his life, but this felt different. This was personal. His grandmother, the woman who had been a constant source of guidance and strength throughout his life, was facing something serious and had chosen to share this burden with him. The sound of footsteps in the hallway interrupted his thoughts. Kate appeared in the doorway, her face bright with the joy that always followed time spent with their children. She was wearing a simple blue sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. The contrast between her relaxed appearance and the formal gravity of the situation he was processing made William's heart ache. "The children are finally settled," Kate said, walking toward him with a smile. "Louis insisted on one more story, but I think he's actually asleep now." She noticed the letter on the table and the serious expression on William's face. Her smile faded. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost?" William gestured to the chair beside him, and Kate sat down immediately. He picked up the letter and handed it to her without saying a word. Kate's eyes moved across the page, her expression changing from curiosity to concern to something approaching alarm. She looked up at William, then back at the letter, reading certain passages again. "How long has she been dealing with this?" Kate asked, her voice barely above a whisper. William shook his head, indicating he had no more information than what was written in the letter. Kate continued reading, her brow furrowed in concentration. When she finished, she carefully folded the letter and placed it back on the table. They sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the implications of what they had just learned. The palace around them seemed quieter than usual, as if the very walls understood the gravity of the situation. William reached for Kate's hand, needing the physical connection to ground himself in the moment. "She's been carrying this alone," William finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "All these months, continuing with her duties, meeting with dignitaries, attending events, and she's been dealing with this by herself." Kate squeezed his hand, understanding the mixture of admiration and concern in his voice. Kate had always marveled at the Queen's strength and dedication, but this revelation added a new dimension to her respect for the monarch. "She's remarkable," Kate said softly. "But she's also human, William. She needs her family now, even if she's trying to protect us from worry." William nodded, thinking about all the recent public appearances his grandmother had made. Looking back, he could now see subtle signs that he had missed at the time. She had seemed more tired after long events, had delegated a few more responsibilities than usual, and had occasionally seemed distant during family gatherings. All of these moments now made sense in light of what he had just learned. "What do we do now?" Kate asked, though she already knew the answer. William looked at her with eyes that seemed older than they had an hour ago. "We prepare," he said simply. "We prepare for whatever comes next, and we support her through this." Kate stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the London skyline. The city continued its daily rhythm, completely unaware of the personal crisis unfolding within the palace walls. She thought about their children upstairs, sleeping peacefully, and how their lives might change in ways they couldn't yet understand. "The children," Kate said, turning back to William. "How do we handle this with them?" William joined her at the window, putting his arm around her shoulders. "We protect them for as long as we can," he said. "But we also prepare them gradually for the possibility that Great-Granny might not always be with us." As evening approached, William and Kate found themselves holding each other close on the sofa, both lost in their own thoughts about the future. The letter sat on the table beside them, a piece of paper that had changed everything in the span of a few minutes. They talked quietly about practical matters, about the meeting that would need to be arranged, about how to maintain their composure during public appearances, and about the additional responsibilities that might soon fall on their shoulders. The weight of the secret they now carried felt enormous. Kate thought about the public events they had scheduled in the coming weeks, wondering how they would manage to smile and engage with crowds while carrying this knowledge. William was already mentally preparing for the conversation with his father and grandmother, knowing it would be one of the most difficult discussions of his life as they prepared for bed that night. Both William and Kate moved more slowly than usual, as if the gravity of the day had physically affected them. They knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges and that their lives had fundamentally shifted, even if the outside world remained unchanged. The morning sun barely peeked through the heavy curtains of Buckingham Palace as William and Kate walked through the long corridors toward the blue drawing room. Their footsteps echoed softly on the polished marble floors, creating a rhythmic sound that seemed to match their racing heartbeats. William wore his navy suit, the one his grandmother had always complimented, while Kate had chosen a simple black dress that seemed appropriate for such a serious occasion. Neither of them had slept well the night before. They had spent hours talking quietly in their bedroom, trying to prepare themselves for what they might hear today. Kate had made William a cup of tea at 3 in the morning when she found him sitting by the window, staring out at the empty streets of London. They both knew this meeting would change everything, but neither could predict exactly how. Charles was already waiting when they arrived, standing near the tall windows that overlooked the palace gardens. His face looked drawn and tired, with lines that seemed deeper than they had been just days before. He turned when he heard them enter, offering a weak smile that didn't reach his eyes. The room felt different today, heavier somehow, as if the very air understood the importance of what was about to happen. "Good morning, Father," William said quietly, embracing Charles briefly. Kate kissed her father-in-law on both cheeks, noting how his hands trembled slightly. She had always admired Charles's strength, but today he seemed smaller, more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. Anne arrived next, her usual brisk efficiency replaced by an uncharacteristic quietness. She nodded to everyone and took her seat in one of the antique chairs that had witnessed countless royal family discussions over the decades. Her military bearing remained intact, but Kate noticed the way her sister-in-law's jaw was clenched, a sign of the tension she was trying to control. Dr. Matthews entered the room at exactly 9 o'clock, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the same serious expression he had maintained for the past 30 years of service to the royal family. He was followed by Sir Edward Young, whose presence confirmed the formal nature of what they were about to discuss. The Queen's private secretary carried several folders and documents, all marked with the distinctive royal seal. "Thank you all for coming," Dr. Matthews began, his voice steady but gentle. He had delivered difficult news to the royal family before, but this felt different. This was about the woman who had been the center of their world for so many years. "I want to be completely honest with you about Her Majesty's condition." Kate reached for William's hand under the table, feeling his palm was cold and slightly damp. She could see the muscle in his jaw working as he prepared himself for whatever they were about to hear. Charles leaned forward in his chair, his hands clasped tightly together, while Anne sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the doctor. The medical explanation was detailed and clinical, but the message was clear. The Queen had been experiencing significant health issues that had been progressively worsening over the past 6 months. She had insisted on maintaining her public duties for as long as possible, but the strain was becoming too much. Dr. Matthews spoke about treatment options, about the likelihood of recovery, and about the realistic timeline they were facing. William felt his world shifting as he listened to each carefully chosen word. This was his grandmother they were discussing. The woman who had taught him about duty and service, who had been present at every important moment of his life. The clinical terms seemed inadequate to describe what was happening to someone so important, so central to everything he understood about his role and his future. Kate watched her husband's face throughout the presentation. Seeing him struggle to maintain his composure, she knew him well enough to recognize the signs of his internal battle between his personal feelings and his royal training. His shoulders had tensed, and he was breathing more carefully, as if controlling each breath would help him control his emotions. "What does this mean for her schedule?" Charles asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sir Edward Young opened one of his folders and began explaining the modifications that would need to be made to the Queen's upcoming engagements. Some events would need to be cancelled, others could be shortened, and several responsibilities would need to be redistributed among other family members. Anne spoke up for the first time, her voice characteristically direct. She hated giving up any of her duties. "You know how she feels about disappointing people." Dr. Matthews nodded, acknowledging that this had been one of the Queen's primary concerns throughout their discussions about her health. William finally found his voice. "Does she want to see us? Individually?" The question had been weighing on him since he received the letter. He needed to speak with his grandmother, to hear from her directly how she was feeling and what she needed from him. Sir Edward Young confirmed that the Queen had specifically requested private meetings with both Charles and William in the coming days. She wanted to discuss certain matters that required discretion and careful planning. The formal language couldn't disguise what everyone in the room understood. She was preparing them for the possibility that significant changes might be coming sooner than anyone had expected. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, covering protocols and procedures that had been established decades ago, but never seemed real until now. They discussed public announcements, media management, and the delicate balance between transparency and privacy that the royal family had always maintained. Kate found herself taking mental notes about things she had never thought she would need to know as they prepared to leave. Dr. Matthews approached William and Kate privately. "She's been asking about you both specifically," he said quietly. "She wants to make sure you're prepared for whatever comes next. She's particularly concerned about how you'll manage with the children." Walking back through the palace corridors, William and Kate moved more slowly than they had earlier. Weight of what they had learned seemed to make each step more difficult. Kate linked her arm through William's, feeling the need for physical connection after such an emotionally draining morning. "She's still fighting," Kate said softly as they reached their car. William nodded, but his eyes were distant. He was thinking about all the conversations he had had with his grandmother over the years, all the lessons she had taught him, and all the things he still wanted to learn from her. The drive back to Kensington Palace was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts about what the future might hold. Kate watched the London streets pass by, thinking about how normal everything looked despite the fact that their world had fundamentally changed in the span of a single morning. The weeks following the family meeting became a blur of carefully scheduled activities and hidden emotions. William and Kate threw themselves into their royal duties with an intensity that surprised even their closest staff members. Every morning began earlier than usual with packed schedules that kept them moving from one engagement to another without pause for reflection. William stood in the children's ward of St. Mary's Hospital, holding the hand of a young boy who was recovering from surgery. The child looked up at him with bright eyes, completely unaware of the weight the prince was carrying. Kate was across the room, reading a story to a group of children who had gathered around her chair. Her voice was animated and cheerful, but William could see the slight tension in her shoulders that only he would notice. "Will you come back and visit us again?" the young boy asked William. The innocence of the question hit William harder than he expected. He promised he would try, knowing that his future visits might come under very different circumstances. The boy smiled widely and returned his attention to the toy car William had brought him. Later that afternoon, they attended the opening of a new community center in East London. The crowd was enthusiastic, waving flags and cheering as their car approached. Kate smiled and waved back, her public persona flawless as always. But during quiet moments between conversations, William noticed how she would glance at him with questions in her eyes. Checking to see how he was managing, the mayor of the local council guided them through the building, proudly showing off the new facilities. William listened attentively to explanations about the youth programs and senior citizen services, asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated his genuine interest. Kate stopped to chat with volunteers, thanking them for their dedication to the community. To everyone watching, they appeared to be the perfect royal couple, engaged and caring. But that evening, as they sat in their private dining room at Kensington Palace, the mask slipped. William pushed his food around his plate without really eating, his mind clearly elsewhere. Kate watched him with growing concern, recognizing the signs of the internal struggle he was fighting. "The children have been asking questions," Kate said softly, breaking the silence that had settled between them. William looked up from his untouched dinner, his eyes focusing on her face. "What kind of questions?" George asked. "Why we've been working so much lately. Charlotte wanted to know when we're going to visit Great Granny again." Kate's voice was gentle, but William could hear the worry underneath. They had always tried to maintain as normal a family life as possible, but the current situation was making that increasingly difficult. William set down his fork and leaned back in his chair. "What did you tell them?" he asked, though he already knew Kate would have handled the questions perfectly. She had a gift for speaking to their children in ways that were honest but age-appropriate. "I told them that Great Granny has been very busy with important work, and that we've been helping by taking care of some of her responsibilities." Kate paused, watching William's reaction. "But I don't think George believed me completely. He's getting old enough to sense when something isn't quite right." That night, William found himself unable to sleep again. He walked quietly to George's bedroom and stood in the doorway, watching his eldest son sleep peacefully. George looked so young in the dim light, his face relaxed and innocent. William thought about his own childhood, about the moments when he first began to understand the weight of his future responsibilities. He wondered when George would face those same realizations. Kate appeared beside him, having noticed his empty side of the bed. She slipped her hand into his, and they stood together watching their son sleep. "He's going to be fine," she whispered. "We'll make sure of it." William nodded. But he couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change in ways they couldn't control. The next day brought another round of public engagements. They visited a veterans hospital, where William spent time talking with former servicemen about their experiences. One elderly veteran, who had served during World War II, spoke about meeting the Queen when she was still a young princess. His eyes lit up as he recalled her dedication and kindness, even as a young woman. "She's been our constant, hasn't she?" the veteran said to William. "Through all the changes, all the difficulties, she's been there. Makes you feel like everything will be all right as long as she's watching over us." William smiled and agreed, but the words cut deep. He wondered what would happen to that sense of security when the constant was no longer there. Kate spent the afternoon at a primary school, participating in a reading program that encouraged children to develop their literacy skills. She sat cross-legged on the floor with a group of 6-year-olds, completely absorbed in their enthusiasm for the story she was reading. For a few moments, surrounded by the uncomplicated joy of children, she could almost forget the heavy secret she was carrying. During the car ride between engagements, William and Kate had brief moments to talk privately. They discussed practical matters like upcoming schedules and family arrangements. But they also shared their fears and concerns. These conversations became their lifeline, the only time they could be completely honest about how they were feeling. "Keep thinking about what she must be going through," William said as they drove through London traffic. "All those years of service, all the sacrifices she's made, and now she has to face this while still trying to protect everyone else." Kate nodded, understanding the mixture of admiration and heartbreak in his voice. That evening, they attended a state dinner at the embassy of a visiting dignitary. The formal setting required them to be at their most diplomatic and charming. Kate wore an elegant blue gown that had been one of the Queen's favorites, a small tribute that only William would understand. They made conversation with foreign officials, posed for photographs, and fulfilled their roles perfectly. But later, as they changed out of their formal clothes, both of them felt exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. The emotional strain of maintaining their public composure while processing such personal turmoil was taking its toll. They held each other close that night, finding comfort in their partnership and shared strength. Their private conversations often turned to the future, to the kind of leaders they wanted to be, and the legacy they hoped to create. These discussions helped them feel more prepared, but they also highlighted how much their lives were about to change. The weight of responsibility that had always been present in their lives was growing heavier with each passing day. The phone rang at 5:30 in the morning on a cold Tuesday in November. William reached for it immediately, his heart already racing before he even heard the voice on the other end. Kate sat up beside him, instantly alert despite having been in deep sleep moments before. The early morning call they had been dreading for weeks had finally come. "Sir, this is Dr. Matthews," the familiar voice said quietly. "I'm calling from Balmoral. Her Majesty passed peacefully in her sleep about an hour ago. The family members who were here were with her at the end." William closed his eyes, feeling the words wash over him like a cold wave. Even though they had been preparing for this moment, nothing could have truly readied him for the reality of it. Kate watched her husband's face as he listened to the details. She saw the exact moment when the news hit him fully, when his expression shifted from concern to devastating grief. His shoulders sagged slightly, and his free hand gripped the bedsheet tightly. She reached out and placed her hand on his arm, offering what comfort she could in that moment. "Thank you for calling, Dr. Matthews," William managed to say, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "We'll make arrangements to travel to Scotland immediately." He ended the call and set the phone down carefully on the nightstand, as if moving too quickly might somehow make the news more real. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Kate moved closer to William, and he turned to face her. The tears that he had been holding back for so many weeks finally began to fall. Kate wrapped her arms around him, and they held each other tightly as the grief they had been preparing for finally overwhelmed them. "She's gone," William whispered against Kate's shoulder. The words sounded strange coming from his mouth, as if saying them out loud made them impossible to take back. Kate felt her own tears starting, not just for the loss of a remarkable woman, but for her husband who had just lost someone who meant everything to him. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in their bedroom while the sun began to rise over London. Outside their window, the city was waking up, completely unaware that the world had fundamentally changed during the night. People were getting ready for work, children were preparing for school, and life was continuing as normal while the royal family processed their devastating loss. Eventually, they knew they had to start making the necessary arrangements. William called his father first, knowing that Charles would need his support during this incredibly difficult time. The conversation was brief but emotional, with both men struggling to find words for what they were feeling. Charles was now king, a role he had prepared for his entire life, but had never truly wanted to claim under these circumstances. Kate went to check on the children, who were still sleeping peacefully in their rooms. She stood in each doorway, watching George, Charlotte, and Louis in their beds, knowing that when they woke up, their lives would be different forever. They would no longer have their great-grandmother, the woman who had been such a loving and constant presence in their young lives. The next few hours passed in a blur of phone calls and arrangements. Staff members arrived at Kensington Palace earlier than usual, their faces somber as they began coordinating the complex protocols that followed the death of a monarch. William and Kate found themselves at the center of a whirlwind of activity, all while trying to process their own grief. Kate helped William choose his clothes for the day, selecting the black suit he would wear for the formal announcements and meetings that lay ahead. Her hand shook slightly as she straightened his tie, both of them aware that this simple act represented the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. When the children woke up, William and Kate sat them down in the family room for one of the most difficult conversations of their lives. George seemed to sense the seriousness of the moment immediately. While Charlotte and Louis looked confused by their parents' sad expressions and gentle voices, "We have something very important to tell you," Kate began, her voice soft but steady. "Great-Granny has gone to heaven. She was very old and very tired, and her body couldn't keep working anymore." The words felt inadequate to explain such a profound loss to such young minds. George's face crumpled immediately, and he began to cry. "But I wanted to see her again," he said through his tears. "I wanted to show her my new drawings." William pulled his eldest son close, feeling his own heart break all over again at the innocent grief in George's voice. Charlotte asked if Great-Granny would come back, a question that nearly undid Kate completely. She explained gently that when people go to heaven, they can't come back, but that Great-Granny would always love them and watch over them. Louis, still too young to fully understand, seemed more concerned about why everyone was crying than about the news itself. The family spent the morning together, talking about their favorite memories of the Queen and looking through photo albums that showed happier times. Kate found pictures of the Queen with each of the children, moments of joy and laughter that now seemed impossibly precious. Around midday, they received word that the official announcement would be made to the public within the hour. William and Kate prepared themselves for the moment when their private grief would become public knowledge, when the world would join them in mourning the loss of someone is truly irreplaceable. They watched from their sitting room as the news broke on television. The announcer's solemn voice confirmed what they already knew, but hearing it broadcast to the nation made it feel more final somehow. Within minutes, crowds began gathering outside Buckingham Palace, people bringing flowers and standing in quiet tribute to the Queen they had loved for so many years. Kate observed William as he watched the public reaction to the news. She could see him processing not just his personal loss, but the weight of what this meant for the country and the Commonwealth. His grandmother had been more than just a family member to him. She had been his mentor, his guide, and his example of what it meant to serve others with dedication and grace. The phone calls continued throughout the day, with world leaders expressing their condolences and making arrangements to attend the funeral. Each conversation required William to maintain his composure while discussing practical matters, even as his heart was breaking. Kate stayed close by his side, offering quiet support and handling details when his emotions threatened to overwhelm him. As evening approached, they realized that this was just the beginning of what would be weeks of public mourning and ceremony. But in that moment, sitting together in their home with their children close by, they allowed themselves to simply grieve for the remarkable woman they had lost and the uncertain future that now lay ahead of them. The days following the Queen's death became a carefully choreographed dance of protocol and grief. William and Kate found themselves swept up in arrangements that had been planned for decades but never felt real until now. The palace staff moved with quiet efficiency, their black armbands a constant reminder of the loss that had shaken the very foundation of the monarchy. William stood in his dressing room, gaping at the black mourning coat laid out for him. Today would be one of the most difficult days of his life, but also one of the most important. The funeral of Queen Elizabeth II would be watched by billions of people around the world, and he needed to represent not just his own grief, but the sorrow of an entire nation. Kate entered the room quietly, already dressed in her black coat, dress, and hat. She looked elegant and composed, but William could see the redness around her eyes that revealed how much she had been crying in private moments. Over the past week, they had both learned to switch between their public and private faces, showing strength when the cameras were rolling, but allowing their true emotions to surface when they were alone. "The children are ready," Kate said softly, adjusting William's tie with gentle hands. George, Charlotte, and Louis would be attending parts of the funeral service, a decision that had required careful consideration. They wanted the children to be part of this historic moment, but they also needed to protect them from being overwhelmed by the enormity of the occasion. The ride to Westminster Abbey was somber and quiet. William held Kate's hand tightly as their car moved through the streets of London, past crowds of people who had come to pay their respects. The sight of so many flowers, flags, and signs of remembrance was both comforting and heartbreaking. His grandmother had touched so many lives, now the entire world was saying goodbye to her together. Inside the abbey, William took his place. In the front row, surrounded by family members who were all struggling with their own grief, Charles, now King Charles III, sat with dignity, despite the pain visible in his eyes. Anne maintained her military bearing, but William noticed how tightly she gripped her hands together. The weight of tradition and ceremony provided structure to their mourning, but it also made everything feel surreal as the service began. William found himself thinking about all the conversations he had shared with his grandmother over the years. She had taught him about duty and service, but also about finding joy in small moments and maintaining hope during difficult times. Her voice seemed to echo in his mind as the Archbishop spoke about her life of dedication and faith. Kate watched. Her husband, throughout the service, seeing him struggle to maintain his composure while honoring his grandmother's memory. When the final hymn was sung and the ceremony drew to a close, she saw something shift in his expression. The grief was still there, but it was joined by something else, a quiet determination and a sense of purpose that she had never seen before. Burial at Windsor Castle was more intimate, with only close family members present. As they stood around the grave, William felt the full weight of his loss settling over him. This was goodbye not just to his grandmother, but to the woman who had been his guide and inspiration throughout his entire life. Kate stood close beside him, their children holding their hands, as they watched the final farewell to someone who had meant everything to them. That evening, back at Kensington Palace, the family gathered in their private sitting room. The formal ceremonies were over, but the real work of processing their grief was just beginning. The children were exhausted from the emotional day, and Kate helped them get ready for bed, while William sat quietly in his chair, staring at the fire. George approached his father before going upstairs, his young face serious beyond his years. "Dad, are you going to be the king now?" he asked, the question that had been weighing on his mind throughout the day. William pulled his son close, trying to find words that would be honest but not frightening. "Not yet, George," William said, gently. "Grandpa Charles is the king now. But someday, when I'm much older, it will be my turn. And someday after that, it might be yours." George nodded thoughtfully, processing this information with the same seriousness he brought to all important matters. After the children were asleep, William and Kate found themselves alone for the first time in weeks. The quiet of their home felt strange after days of constant activity and crowds of people. They sat together on the sofa, neither of them speaking for a long time, both lost in their own thoughts about everything that had happened. "She would be proud of how you handled today," Kate said finally, breaking the silence. William looked at her with tired eyes, the weight of the day evident in every line of his face. "I kept thinking about what she would want me to do, how she would want me to behave. It felt like she was guiding me through it." Kate reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers in a gesture of comfort and connection. "She was," she said. "Simply everything she taught you, everything she showed you about service and dignity, it was all there today. You honored her memory perfectly." William felt tears threatening again, but this time they were different. Along with the sadness, there was also gratitude for the years he had been able to learn from such an extraordinary woman. The lessons she had taught him about leadership, about putting others before yourself, and about finding strength in difficult times would stay with him forever. They talked late into the night about the future, about the additional responsibilities that would now fall on their shoulders, and about how to help their children understand their changing roles. The conversation was difficult, but necessary, helping them begin to process not just their grief, but also the new reality they were facing as they prepared for bed. Both William and Kate moved slowly, as if the events of the day had physically exhausted them. But there was also a sense of having completed something important, of having said goodbye with dignity and love. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new responsibilities, but tonight they could simply be a husband and wife, mourning the loss of someone they had loved deeply. 3 months had passed since the funeral, and William found himself standing before the tall mirror in their bedroom, adjusting the collar of his navy blue suit. The reflection looking back at him seemed different somehow, older and more serious than it had been before. The weight of his expanded role as heir apparent had settled on his shoulders like a heavy cloak that he was still learning to carry. Kate approached from behind, her reflection joining his in the mirror. She wore a simple, cream-colored dress that the Queen had once complimented, a small way of keeping her memory close. Their eyes met in the glass, and without words, they both acknowledged how much their lives had changed since that devastating phone call months ago. "The children are asking about the summer holidays," Kate said quietly, smoothing down William's lapel with gentle fingers. "They want to know if we'll still be able to go to Balmoral like we used to." The question was innocent enough, but it represented so much more than a simple family vacation. Balmoral held memories of the Queen that were both precious and painful. William turned around to face his wife directly, taking her hands in his. "We'll go," he said with quiet determination. "The children need those memories, and honestly I think we do too. She would want us to continue the traditions that brought the family together." Kate nodded, understanding that this decision was about more than just a holiday. It was about honoring the past while building their own future. The past few months had been a period of adjustment that none of them could have fully prepared for. William's schedule had expanded dramatically as he took on many of the Queen's former responsibilities. He had meetings with government officials, foreign dignitaries, and Commonwealth leaders that required a level of diplomatic skill he was still developing. Each day brought new challenges that tested everything his grandmother taught him about leadership and service. Kate had also seen her role evolve in ways she hadn't expected. The public looked to her for stability and grace during this period of transition, and she had risen to meet those expectations while also protecting her family's privacy. She had become William's closest advisor and most trusted confidant, helping him navigate the complex emotional and practical challenges of his new position. That morning, they had received word that William would need to undertake his first major solo overseas tours as the direct heir to the throne. The trip would take him to several Commonwealth nations, representing not just the royal family but the continuity of the monarchy itself. The significance of this responsibility wasn't lost on either of them. "Are you ready for this?" Kate asked, though she already knew the answer. William had been preparing for this role his entire life, but the reality of it was still overwhelming at times. He nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "I have to be ready. The people deserve someone who can serve them the way she did." Later that morning, they visited the small memorial garden that had been created at Kensington Palace in the Queen's honor. The space was filled with flowers and messages from people around the world who wanted to express their love and gratitude for her years of service. William and Kate walked through the garden quietly, reading some of the handwritten notes and taking comfort in the outpouring of affection for someone who had meant so much to them personally. George, Charlotte, and Louis joined them in the garden, each child carrying a small bouquet of flowers they had picked from their own garden at home. They had developed their own rituals for remembering their great-grandmother, simple acts that helped them process their grief in age-appropriate ways. George had started writing letters to her that he kept in a special box, while Charlotte drew pictures of their favorite memories together. "Will Great-Granny know we're thinking about her?" Charlotte asked, as she placed her flowers near a particularly beautiful rose bush. Kate knelt down beside her daughter, choosing her words carefully. "I think she will, sweetheart. Love doesn't stop just because someone goes to heaven. She'll always know how much we love her." That afternoon, William had his first major meeting with the Prime Minister in his new capacity. The discussion covered everything from domestic policy to international relations, topics that would now be a regular part of his responsibilities. Kate waited for him at home, knowing that each of these meetings was helping him grow into the leader he was meant to become. When William returned home that evening, Kate could see both exhaustion and satisfaction in his face. The meeting had gone well, and he was beginning to feel more confident in his ability to fulfill the role that had been thrust upon him sooner than expected. They sat together in their study, talking through the details of his day and planning for the challenges that lay ahead. "She prepared me for this," William said as they reviewed his upcoming schedule. "All those years of guidance, all the lessons about putting duty before personal preference, it's all making sense now." Kate smiled, seeing the man she had married growing into the king he would someday become, as they prepared for bed that night. Both William and Kate reflected on how far they had come since that terrible morning when everything changed. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it had been joined by purpose and determination. They had learned to carry their loss while also embracing their future responsibilities. William stood at their bedroom window, looking out at the lights of London sprawling before them. These were the people he would serve, the lives that would be affected by the decisions he would make in the years to come. The responsibility felt enormous, but it also felt right. Kate joined him at the window, slipping her arm around his waist. "Tomorrow starts a new chapter," she said softly, echoing words the Queen had once spoken to them about embracing change and moving forward with courage. William nodded, thinking about the tour he would soon undertake, the speech he would give, and the countless other duties that lay ahead, when he finally opened the door to step out into his new role as the direct heir to the throne. William carried with him everything his grandmother had taught him about service, dignity, and love. Kate walked beside him, ready to face whatever challenges and opportunities the future would bring. Together, they stepped forward into a destiny that had been forever changed by loss, but strengthened by the unbreakable bond of their partnership and the enduring legacy of the remarkable woman who had shaped them both.